Hello, everybody. Welcome to our RPO podcast. I'm really excited about this. I've just been chatting to my guest this morning, and I think we might have to do a part two because we're just wondering how we're going to keep this to 30 minutes. My guest this morning is Gil Woodward. I have worked with Gil for, I can't even remember how many years, but it's been a great journey. I've been with him through several companies. And he's actually just about to start a new job in a couple of weeks, which he's very excited about. And what I'm going to do, rather than try and introduce Gil myself, what I want him to do is for him to introduce himself to you. And our subject today is talent management within manufacturing, which I think is going to be fascinating. So, Gil, tell us all about yourself. Tell us who you are and a little bit of your history.
Yeah, with pleasure. So for those people that don't know me, my name's Gil, and I have had a cracking career so far and looking forward to many more interesting chapters and challenges to come. Early in my career, I worked for a charity in the education sector, which suited me down to the ground because it got me interested and learning about education and people's development. And that really fits neatly with me. I come from a family of teachers, and I was adamant that I was not going to be a teacher, but I kind of am, and I can't really get away from that. So I do have a master's degree in teaching, during which I looked at how we teach adults, not so much children. I have taught in secondary schools, but actually where I am more interested is in that kind of space around how we facilitate learning. So I'm thinking teaching in the most general sense, much more like an education sense rather than the specific model of teacher standing by blackboard with children sitting at a desk. I'm thinking about it in a bit broader sense. And you're right, Cherie, I've been on the job hunt recently. And this was inspired really by one of the questions that I got asked in an interview recently, where somebody said to me, talk about where you've been in an excellent environment or an excellent business for talent management. And I ended up saying, I'm not sure I have. And yeah. I don't know whether I did a cracking disservice to several businesses. I might have done. I might have been completely wrong. But I did think it would be a really interesting area for you and I to chat about over the next sort of 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, definitely. So tell us
I think that's
about the job you come from and the job you're going to then, Gil.
Yeah, so I've had the privilege of making sticky tape for the last 3 years, which was an absolute joy and incredibly complicated from a chemical point of view, which was right up my street. And I'm off to join a business that's making cleaning chemicals and lubricants and polymers and things like that. So very excited to be joining them in early September.
Yeah, and it was wine. Wine was where I met you.
Wine is where you met me. Yeah.
You better explain that.
Yeah, wine was great because when you speak to people and they say, well, what do you do? And you say, oh, I make wine. You just get fabulous responses.
Yeah.
Which was ironic because fundamentally, what did we do? If you drank too much of the product, we impaired decision making and at worst created liver disease. Ironically, before that, I worked in a pharmaceutical company.
Oh no!
Millions of people better from diseases they would otherwise not recover from. And yet universally, when I said to people I work for a pharmaceutical company, I tended to get this response like, oh, you've sold your soul. Like dodgy sales practices in the third world or in Africa and all those kind of complexities of how do you get medication out to poorer communities. And there are real challenges in that. But I always found it really ironic that actually fundamentally I worked in one business that was making people better and everyone told me I was awful and I was sold my soul for the corporate world. And in the other one where actually I was making wine and I don't think I was massively contributing in a grand sense. But the opposite response. Anyway.
And the roles you've had in those businesses, what were the roles you've had in those businesses?
So I kind of worked my way up in a continuous improvement and lean kind of functional responsibility. And when I was with Accolade in the wine industry, I moved over from working in working in the CI bit entirely, and then moved over into the direct management of manufacturing. And for a little talent related anecdote around that, I was chatting with and mentoring one of my colleagues whilst with the wine company. And he got to the point where he started to talk to other businesses, and he wanted to develop his career elsewhere. And he was really on that fence between, do I work full time in CI, or do I want to work full time in the management of the thing? And he was he worked in like laboratories and quality and that side of things. And I ended up sharing with him a phrase. And he didn't ask where it came from. And I always think that's incredibly dangerous. And I said to him, well, if you're in CI, it's a little bit like being the critic. But if you're in direct management, it's a little bit more like being the artist.
Nice
so
one.
The real question is, do you want to be the critic forever? Or actually, at some point, do you want to be the artist? Now, I nicked that.
I was going to say, I've heard that before, but I don't know where it comes from.
Nick Hornby novel, High Fidelity.
There you go.
It's a favourite of mine. A great story, but nothing to do with business. And we were on friendly terms. So he went to an interview with another business, and he came back and he said, "Oh, I think I really aced the interview. You know, they asked me about why did I want to move from working in CI to working in direct management, and I gave them that phrase that you gave me."
He thought it was your phrase.
He did. He gave me credit. I can honestly say there's not an original thought in my head. Everything's come somewhere else.
I love it. And the sticky tape, what role did you have with the tape company?
So I worked as an ops director for the tape company, and that's what I'm going to do in my next role as well. Continuing.
Okay, going into an ops director role.
Absolutely. Love it. Love the breadth of operations. Love that we're actually making something. That is part of the fascination. Aside from my interest in education, my first degree was in chemistry. I've never really lost that. I still love I do love a chemical problem when it comes along, and investigating those kind of physical properties of materials. That is fascinating to me.
Excellent.
I can really geek out on that stuff.
But we're talking about talent management today in manufacturing, which makes me smile. When we decided to have it as a subject, it makes me smile because RPO is all about empowerment and identifying and releasing talent. My experience over the last 10 years in manufacturing, and I don't come from a manufacturing background, has been that the focus on talent in manufacturing is, the word that's springing into my head is pitiful.
Hold back.
No, the word is pitiful. It's because it's about pace. I mean, manufacturing, my observation as an outsider is that manufacturing is all about pace, and there's no time for consideration of talent or talent development. Lead away with your thoughts on it. What was your first consideration?
Well, I thought better start out by getting some sense of scope and definition of actually what is it that we're talking about. My first question, I think, for us to wrestle with is what are the systemic and cultural building blocks for effective talent development? What is it that we want to talk about? And if I could chuck a couple out there,
go for it.
I think there needs to be some kind of process of talent identification.
Absolutely.
And that's not the same as an annual appraisal.
Very much.
And to cite an example, if in case somebody's listening to me and thinking, well, what? The example I'd give, actually, I could take teaching as an example, or I could take the health system. A competent doctor doesn't necessarily make a competent administrator, manager. And in the same way, a great teacher doesn't necessarily make a great leader of schools. So you could, if you were to do an annual appraisal and you were looking at competence in performing the role, you might end up promoting the wrong people because actually their skills are better suited to one role, not to a management role.
Get it.
So that's a talent ID process.
Can I just interject? I would suggest one prior to that, and that's an appetite within the environment. to acknowledge the benefit of before identifying it, because the problem I come across is that there's not a desire or an appetite to even consider, the businesses I tend to work with mainly focus on just buying in. So they recruit, they buy, and they believe that they buy it in rather than look for their existing in their executive. So I'd put as number one appetite.
In the varied career history, I don't know if you and I have ever spoken about this. I was a nightclub bouncer.
No, I never spoke of that. And Gil, all the other things, chemist, teacher, manufacturing operations director, sit well with me, but nightclub bouncer, I cannot get my head around for you.
I loved it. I had an absolutely brilliant time. It's kind of how I funded my way through my undergraduate degree.
Oh, wow.
I had a ball, but I remember having this really vividly, having this conversation with a chap that ran a company of nightclub bouncers, and I was 20 at the time. Yeah. So and he said something to me that grated. He said, "What I do is I only ever hire bouncers with more than 10 years experience."
Okay.
And I said, "Well, that's admirable. It's great, but if everyone did that,
we'd be in trouble.
There wouldn't be any new bouncers, would there?" At age 20, I had no opportunity to have 10 years experience.
Absolutely.
So for me, it was like there was a personal bit in there.
Yeah.
I can't possibly achieve that. So it wasn't really good competence. But then I got into this ridiculous conversation where I said, "Yeah, but if you don't develop any new people, then there won't eventually the pipeline will come out."
Yeah.
And he was saying, "But there's always other bouncers. There's always people." I know that now, but if everyone took on and I didn't get anywhere. So
oh dear, it's a good argument.
To agree to disagree.
Yeah. So we've got appetite, we've got identification. So what would you put next?
Well, actually, I think can I pick up on your point there, because I do think you're right, and I think there's a couple of really interesting bits in there around that wider culture. So you described it as appetite. I think if you went to someone like Matthew Syed, he'd be talking about growth mindset versus fixed mindset.
Yep.
And what was really interesting, if you read Black Box Thinking by Matthew Syed, he picked up on two industries and contrasted the two industries, and they were respectively aviation and healthcare.
Right.
And one is effective in learning from their mistakes. One is absolutely serious about it. And the other one, less so.
Yeah.
And consequently, when there was that tragedy and the Malaysia Airlines flight was lost over the ocean west of Australia, do you know that was 1/3 of all of the casualties that happened in the air that year?
Wow.
Globally, within that one incident.
Wow.
And that's how much the aviation industry has been effective at taking something that is fundamentally dangerous. You're going to put human beings in a steel can and you're going to chuck them up in the air. That's not smart, is it?
No.
That's not the foundation for something safe. And yet they've managed to make it incredibly good. Whereas in healthcare, actually there are still lots of errors. And I've had some personal experiences. I've got a couple of great anecdotes I could share about how the healthcare system has failed to learn from experience.
Yeah.
And that I think is really important.
Interesting.
The economist Nassim Taleb, interestingly, he picked up on exactly the same two industries and contrasted them to talk about. He talked about it in terms of, he asked the question about what's the opposite of fragile.
Yep.
And he argued, and I loved it. He argued that is not robust, because he said if something is fragile, then if you stress it, it's likely to break.
Yep.
He said actually the neutral position is robust, because if you stress it, nothing happens.
Yep.
But in biological systems, like your immune response, actually, if you stress it, it gets more effective.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's also a powerlifter.
Okay. So that's
economist and powerlifter. Great combination. Love it.
Get it.
And I really liked it, because fundamentally, what Syed and Taleb were both picking up on is you've got to want to learn.
Right.
And you said appetite. With it, appetite to develop talent, and I would say there's got to be an acceptance of learning.
Yep.
Which means there's got to be an acceptance of mistakes.
Yep.
Providing that they're getting learned from.
So, can I'm gonna sort of maybe turn it a bit on its head. We were talking prior to this. Can I take you to the last thing that you mentioned, which was about is it the responsibility, or whose responsibility is it to develop talent? Is the onus on management, or is it, in your opinion, on the individual? Because this is something I run into all the time. I'm trying to recruit deputy team leaders for one of my RPO teams at the moment, and I've been reliably informed that nobody wants the job. And that is because they've watched the development of the team leaders and nobody wants the job. And this is the problem I will be tackling in that particular environment over the coming months. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's interesting. I guess I haven't really seen it so much in that context. What I've heard is, in some cases, and particularly like at a graduate level, I've heard an expectation that there is a clear and defined pathway for me to work my way down that's going to get me into running the world. And that's like a transference of individual responsibility entirely onto the company. That would feel right. No, because I think the only person that's going to really know how they wish to develop is the individual.
Right.
And I think I've also seen, in that kind of graduate sense, I've seen some individuals who are very well suited to, I would say, technical analyst, high value roles that are not management, and that they've been identified as talent because they're intelligent, they're articulate, they're well educated, loads of really good skills. But they haven't wanted to go down that career trajectory of management. And then consequently, is it a failure then that they're in those kind of technical roles? Some of them feel so, but that doesn't feel right to me, because we're subject matter experts of what to do deliver. The value of expertise. And I think manufacturing is at great risk as a systemic a systemic wide view that we fail to develop functional talent.
Yes, and I agree. I think it's interesting because you're referring to and this is quite good, I think, because you're thinking in your head about the more senior roles, and I'm thinking about the junior roles, although they're all absolutely vital to getting a product out the door. But you know, the issues are the same all the way through. And I just want to pick up on something you just said about only the individual knows how they want to develop. I actually want to disagree with that, because my personal experience is that the individuals don't know how they want to develop. I've just recently...
I meant in terms of only they can decide.
They can decide, absolutely, but they have to have some level of exposure to give them some choices to make those decisions. And I've taken to ask people to say,
I don't know where I'm going.
But that's
no
it.
Idea.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? And I think the problem I see with talent development, I really be interested in, and this is at all levels. You're working at that, what we call the senior level, and I'm working at that shop floor level. I'm working with operators and I'm working with team leaders. And I spot talent at that level. And in amongst an operator population, I am always absolutely, one of my favorite phrases, gobsmacked at the level of talent that just is not utilized. You know, people with leadership abilities, technical abilities, you've got people sitting in there with degrees, and it's never spotted. And then we go to what you're talking about in those management levels, you know, where traditionally people have thought the only route for progression is management of other people. And you and I both know not everybody's suited to that. And I'm absolutely in agreement that going down a route of becoming an expert, a subject matter expert in something, should be seen as an equal option.
Yeah.
So, but you know, this
there has to be value associated with that. You know? And I think, actually, if we could develop some systems for its effective recognition, but we've also got to create value out of it as well. So where we have really high level functional skills, it's not enough for that just to sit in the individual. I think you and I both know that has to be effectively shared. But actually, if we're talking about financial reward, that actually we've got to find some way then of being able to recognize that the knowledge and skill is shared in others. Then I'd be well up for rewarding that financially.
Okay, cool.
Actually, if it was just, and I have met plenty of operators, and this is true, they know it all, and they're quite happy to sit there knowing it all. Yeah, and then say, "Oh, that Muppet over there, I can't believe he doesn't know how to do
they
that."
won't share it. No, they won't share it. And
I don't want to reward that.
Yeah, no, that's a challenge. So coming back to identification then, what do you think are the best ways to identify talent in manufacturing?
I think that that's an interesting question, because we've already talked about two very different areas of talent that we want to develop. And I would already offer that there's more than that, because what we haven't really touched on is engineering. And we haven't talked on what I see as a real opportunity and burgeoning field around. I was going to say data analytics, and then I caught myself, because it's more than the data analytics. It's also the implementation of the data gathering equipment. If you like, censor the shiznick out of everything, chuck it all into all the data you can get into some form of malleable data handling unit, and then start asking good questions of it. Or linking the information between different areas. And so there's a whole area of skill there that I'd love to see develop more effectively. It frustrates me enormously that we haven't got the value out of it. When I see a machine and it's turning, and there's a motor driving it, and there is some degree of logic about how fast the motor needs to turn, or how much current it should be drawing, and yet we don't monitor the current, we don't monitor the revolution, we don't monitor the torque on it. And then after the event, we're surprised when there's variation in the product. And none of those things are hard to do. What we do seem to have is I think a cultural reluctance for just investing in it and getting going. And I don't mean that in a sense of there's a reluctance to spend the money. Actually, I think on a quite high level, there is the interest in it and the demand. I think there's a real struggle in skill identification and talent identification, where people can say, actually, I could go and buy this 10 quid sensor from a distributor, and I know how I could use that and stick it into an IT. Well, there's an interesting area of talent.
Absolutely.
Then we've got the engineering skill we've got to identify. Then we've got competence at actually performing manufacturing operations, running lines, performing root cause analysis, doing short interval control. And then we've got another set of talent, which is potential for leadership and management.
Absolutely.
And I think in each of those cases, I think we need a bit of a different lens and different questions to ask, because we are aspiring to have skill in differing areas. And I don't really know how, if somebody has had zero exposure to it, how have they got the opportunity to demonstrate the potential?
Absolutely, which is kind of what I was talking about earlier on. And I just want to pick up on a word that you used in that with cultural, that the talent, spotting talent and developing talent within manufacturing, I don't think that it's part of manufacturing culture generally. We both have seen other businesses, particularly me, because I have clients in other sectors, where talent spotting and talent development is a priority. But I don't get that feeling in manufacturing. And why do you think that is? What is the culture of manufacturing with regard to talent, as far as you're concerned, someone who's worked in manufacturing for a long time?
I think you're right. You said pitiful. I think variable. And I wonder if it is because we do have to have the obsession with the thing we're making.
Exactly, and getting it made quickly.
Around that. And I guess maybe if we took something like recruitment, the effectiveness of a recruitment business is so much around the talent of the networker to link demand and supply. fundamentally. Whereas actually in manufacturing, no, it's a lot more about getting the widgets out. And there is the real risk of, as long as the widgets go out the door,
Yep.
then the rest of the business might not ask a question.
Right.
And I think that's very culturally.
Well, that's my experience. That is definitely my experience. Absolutely.
Dorothy Leonard Barton wrote a lovely bit in a book that I read fairly early on in my manufacturing career, which I loved, where she went to a steel mill in the States. And in the steel mill, she went to see this, or she was watching the operation, and the operator started to make what she perceived to be engineering adjustments to the running of this mill.
Yep.
So she went over and challenged him, and she said, well, you're the operator, what are you doing? And he said, well, look, I've identified that I can get another 0.25% yield by making the adjustment. So I'm familiar with how to do it, and I'm going ahead and doing it. And I'm going to get the extra 0.25% yield. I'm fine. And she said, well, this is wonderful. There's such highly skilled operators, so talented. They've got so much potential, and it's not just potential. They're actually putting the pedal to the metal. They're delivering better results for their business. And who wouldn't want that? And then she went and interviewed the engineering manager, who said, this place is hell on earth. I hate it. It's a nightmare. It's chaotic. I never know what anyone's doing. I've no idea how all the machines are set up, because everyone's changing it all the time. There's no controls over anything. And he said,
I give up.
All out.
Yeah.
So I think that was I really liked it, because she didn't come to a conclusion about what was right. She just made the observation.
Right.
And she just showed that these two people in this business had such differing perspectives on the behaviour. And I would say that emergent behaviour, that is the prevalent culture. How we do what we do, that's culture. So I think there's a really interesting question there about what is the balance? What level of systemic control do you want to put in place? What does empowerment look like? Because empowerment without any rules is chaos.
Absolutely.
Everyone picks on their pet topic, and off we go. We're going to go and do that, and that's not helpful. So you've got to provide some leadership direction to say, yes, you want to be over there.
Yep.
And that has to be some structure to it. But then, and you have to get people comfortable and aligned with that. Why was that engineering manager so stressed out by it? Did he doubt the competence of the individuals to make the changes? Yeah. Or did he feel that actually some of it should have been in his responsibility? Where was the mismatch that caused that emotional discomfort?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I really like that, and I totally agree with you. My experience of it is that because of that, I wrote down the word pressure as you were talking. Pressure to get the widgets out the door. What tends to happen is, in my observation, is that we put layers of hierarchy in, who are assigned the role of policing to ensure that the widgets go out the door. And then the more layers you put in, the worse the communication within the environment. And then teamworking goes out of the window. And we get that situation you have just described, where you've got an operator operating in a way that seems wonderful. And then you've got an engineering manager who's absolutely devastated by it, because he has no idea, or she has no idea what's going on. So I think structures, attitude, culture, the level of pressure, all of this, has something to do with it. But you, in your roles, what approach have you tried to take to it, Gil, within the roles that you've had?
So I've tried to take on a one-to-one mentoring, coaching type responsibility for people when they have expressed the interest and I've felt, and that's a terrible measure. I think it should be part of it. There's something you've got to feel it. You've got to know with your gut, but that can't be the only measure on your own. Otherwise, then there's risk of bias on that on that kind of decision making. But that's what I've relied on a lot to identify actually. Who's making the effort? Where's the interest? Where's the opportunity to try and develop somebody? And then I've tried to find out how we could negotiated
So
through
you've taken a very personal approach to
very
it,
personal, yeah.
which is great.
Yeah, and I think that is what it is. I think that's probably what came to, going right back to the start. That's probably why I said, I'm not sure I've ever been anywhere brilliant, but that I have worked in spaces where actually I've had plenty of opportunity to develop and foster those one-to-one relationships. Maybe that's the opposite of it. Maybe no, I have. Maybe that is what good looks like. That those relationships are able to develop organically. If we systemize the whole thing and we become rigid about it, that doesn't feel like excellence.
No, that I don't think that's right.
But neither does it running the whole thing ad hoc, because we run risk. One of the things that I thought we'd end up talking about in this, but we haven't, and something I shared with you before was that when Peter Senge analysed the beer game, one of the lessons he wrote about it was, he said, leverage in human systems is subtle.
Right.
And I love that phrase, because when we're talking about developing staff, you mentioned the magic word communication earlier. And we haven't really talked about that, but there is real subtlety in the effectiveness of communication. I think a lot of the time, because we are competent in talking and generally competent in listening, in moderation, then I think we run the risk that we think we can apply those skills to the effective development of talent. And I think there's some excellent stuff out there. Nancy Klein, in her Time to Think, she really talks about the importance of finding the individual's thinking, not thinking about the external forces acting on an individual, but thinking about how that individual is thinking, what they're deciding, how they're taking responsibility for what they're learning. I really like that. If you went somewhere like Chris Aguirre's double loop learning, that's getting on a bit now, but it's right in terms of, we've got to learn from our experience, but we've also got to put in the second loop about the systemic development as well. So we can't just learn from our experience, we've also got to make systemic changes to prevent mistakes happening in the future. I really think that actually is a fundamental of root cause. So Chris Aguirre was talking about it from an organizational learning point of view. I think lean experts would talk about root cause analysis and 5 whys. They're the same thing fundamentally. Democritus nailed it in ancient Greece. He said that a fool can learn from their experience, but the wise man learns from the experience of others. Really, what we're talking about there is systemic learning. And Democritus got it. So there's an opportunity. I think so in that subtlety of communication. I think there is a real risk that then we entrust people within a business, because they can talk, because they can communicate effectively in other aspects of management. We entrust them with aspects of talent development without necessarily equipping them.
Absolutely.
In getting a master's degree in teaching, in having a Lean Six Sigma black belt, in all that kind of experience that I've managed to build up, I've got a master's degree. I wouldn't describe me as a master of developing others. If anything, I think that's very arrogant and a very dangerous perspective to take. I think I'm much more conscious now of my incompetence. I'm very I am always weighed down by the number of times I've got it wrong, where I have been interested in personal conversations with people, and I recognize that my input or involvement in their conversation was detrimental to their learning or the development.
Interesting.
So easy to do, but horrifying. I don't want to be in that. I don't want to be in that perspective.
No. That's interesting. Look, it's an absolutely fascinating subject, and we've just touched on it. And I'm feeling that we might do a part 2 to this and cover it a bit more, because I think I've really enjoyed the discussion around it. I just think there's so much in it. Because my business is about developing talent within manufacturing, particularly at operator level, I get so frustrated with the cultural blockers to that. And I would love to spend more time talking with you to see if you can give me some guidance and help on how I can unblock some of those blockers. Going forward, where I've got RPO in.
Excellence in sales coming through here.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm doing it whilst I know we're still recording. This is my best.
Exactly. Yes, I'm doing it. You can't say no. you know, where I've got RPO in, I've managed to do it, but I have to still work constantly against the culture, which suppresses talent. You know, that operator that you were talking about in your example earlier on, my biggest problem is that operators feeling, what's the point? That's the single most common phrase I get. What's the point? What's the point? What's the point? And that's the prevailing attitude that I'm working with when trying to get people to engage in development. You know, even if they do have talent, what's the point? So yeah, I can feel a part 2 coming on, Gil. I've thoroughly enjoyed that conversation. I hope our listeners enjoy it as well. Brilliant conversation, and good luck with the new role. Thank you very much for being our guest this morning.
That was my pleasure. Thank you.